Welcome back to Revving Up with RevEng Consulting. I'm your host, Matt Haller, and I'm joined again with the founder of Cordion, Michael Ludlow. Welcome back to Revving Up, Michael.
Thanks for having me back.
So last week, we were talking a little bit about your career, how you found your world into the world of incentive compensation management, and how you were the director of professional services at Captivate IQ. Take us back to 2020, at the time when we thought the world was coming to an end, that the markets were coming to an end, and then all of a sudden, software is flying off the shelves. And at some point, you noticed that the sale price and the deal size for software was growing at a pace that wasn't aligning with what was happening on services, and that the services contracts weren't being attached as much. They weren't being attached at the same rates or the same value. When did you notice that was an issue, and how did you think about approaching that?
Yeah. So back in 2020, Captivate IQ was essentially giving those implementations away, which made sense for that time. Going for subscription revenue, and implementation revenue was the sacrificial lamb. At one point, Captivate IQ started becoming more focused on overall company profitability. What we were not doing at that time was increasing implementation prices. All of our implementations were grossly underpriced. If we were to be a scalable company, we needed to up those implementation fees and actually reflect the true level of effort associated with these implementations.
And just to be clear, because when you say that they're grossly underpriced, price and value is, as we talked about last week, in the eye of the beholder. Was it that you didn't feel the contracts were as big as they could be, or that the contracts were not big enough to service or to pay for the resources that were supposed to service them?
The latter. The reality is that the software, as good as it is, and I will sing the software's praises all day from the rooftops, for these implementations to be successful, they still require heavy consultation with someone who knows the software, with someone who knows the space, with someone who knows how to ask the right questions and really get into the shoes of the customer and understand what are your data constraints, what are your resource constraints, where are the parts of your plans that maybe are not fully or very well defined, or that are potentially problematic when it comes to how they play with other parts of your plans or other measures. I feel like almost every implementation, at least once, come across a particular plan mechanic where when you're modeling for it and you're working with the actual data, you realize as the modeler, as the person in the weeds, and as the comp plan admin, as you're kind of watching how the system calculates the output, you realize, oh, this is going to cannibalize completely that other measure that you're also putting in front of you. The same rep is going to cause problems. So yes. And do you really want to drive this particular behavior? And I can't tell you how many times, Matt, I have seen these comp plan admins, they scratch their head. They're like, oh, yeah. Now that we're actually considering the actual data and the calculations, I see that this is a problem. I'm going to take this back to the sales ops person that could potentially make a change.
In that scenario, what you're describing is the standard in sales compensation. Every implementation you have is going to have that level of opaqueness on some calculations. And that is just another input that makes pricing the services contract harder. But I also wonder if there's an element when you're going back to trying to price, there's always going to be an element of, I need to just get the software out the door. So I'm going to price my services at a rate that feels reasonable. But then there's also a conversation around, well, if I start to increase the price of my services, if I start to scope out what the plans are going to take, it's going to introduce friction into the sales process. Is that something that you had to experience, and how did you overcome that kind of a, call it, objection from your own sales team?
Oh man, friction. I heard that word a lot during that time. Friction, friction, friction. It was always the go-to rebuttal. Hey, let's actually scope the true level of effort that this implementation is going to take, and let's focus on the value associated with a good implementation. If we actually reflect the true level of effort, or if we increase the price of the implementation, that could jeopardize the subscription revenue, that could jeopardize the deal. And so it became a mission of mine to try to help the sales team really reframe in their minds the value that an implementation perspective could bring.
One of the things that I've noticed about that is that when you bring the implementation perspective into the sales process, is somebody's going to say very quickly, these are the three places where you're going to have the biggest issues. And sometimes you're able to bring in folks who maybe have worked on competitive platforms as well and say, here's where other platforms are going to work well or not. And if you do that in an authentic way, you're actually coming to the deal with more power because you are creating more authenticity and more trust with the customer. And you are able to show them, here's where the effort is going to be. This is where no matter who you go with, you are going to have to spend time, money, and effort. And if you can start with that conversation, you can start to command higher prices on both the software and the services.
Not only command higher prices, but also you're going to up your close rate. You're going to close more deals because customers are going to, if you bring in the unsexy SME from the implementation side, maybe we're not salespeople, but we know the real world when it comes to comp, and we can speak to how this is actually going to play out. And customers appreciate that perspective, and that's going to lend credibility to the whole sale.
So I think one question I have in that environment, do you have any tips or tricks on how you can make that interaction work better together so that you can get the trust of the services team with the sales velocity and the credibility of the sales team?
I would say I have seen professionals being brought into these sales calls that like to really descend into the weeds and get into the thick of all of the particulars of how a clawback works and a recoverable draw works and the nuances of this, that, or the other. I think that there is a way to ask higher level questions, appropriately make sure that you're doing your diligence to make sure that you're getting enough information to come up with a fairly accurate estimate of scope, while also in the same call, answer the customer's questions about, well, what does the implementation process look like? Why should we even care about a good implementation? Well, here's why you should care. The sales commissions are generally your largest financial statement line item on your P&L. You're going to want to make sure you get that right, not only from an accuracy standpoint, but you're also going to want to make sure that your comp plans are appropriately motivating the right behavior. I think that there is a balance to be struck when it comes to asking the right questions to be able to quickly narrow in on the complex areas at your client's org that could potentially have a significant bearing on the level of effort, whether that's data hygiene. Oh, okay, looks like you guys have a lot to do in your CRM instance to be ready to have calculations be layered over the top of that data. I'm looking through your comp plans and I notice that they are very, very light and a lot of things are ambiguous and not well defined. If it's not well defined in your comp plan, it's probably going to be hard to model for it because we're going to have to ask, like, you make no mention of clawbacks. You make no mention of how do you handle clawbacks? Well, I don't know. You make no mention of when the commission on a particular deal is earned. I've even seen that where it's not well defined in the comp plan, and that can create headaches from an implementation standpoint because there's a lot of back and forth and, oh, we hadn't thought of that. Okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board and think through the implications. Ultimately, I think that a good use of an SME from the professional services side of things, a professional services time in the sales process should probably be some mix, maybe it's half and half, of asking questions to ascertain what are the areas that could give rise to significant complexity in the implementation. And then two, talk about the value. Talk about the value that a good implementation experience with good people on the implementation team is going to bring to the client in the context of the implementation, but also when it comes to setting them up for success post-implementation.
What I really like about that is when you have one person asking discovery questions, because what you're essentially saying is if you sell software that also requires services, and let's say those services are beyond, $1,000, right? If it's just, plug and play, call it a day. But if you actually have effort, if people need to be involved, having multiple people involved in the selling process can actually give you better discovery that can give you a better position to sell into that account. The key to doing that from a services perspective is treat it like I'm talking to you about your implementation, but then using that as an opportunity to go deeper and ask probing questions. So for example, saying something for a Captivate IQ implementation, like, typically when we do these implementations, they're about 6 weeks long. And our focus on the end goal is we want to create a statement that drives the right behaviors for your field, and while also creating the technical infrastructure to make managing this program easy for you. In that process, we're going to start by doing some data requirements collection. We're going to look at your plans. We're going to look at some data. But usually what we find is that there's a couple of plans that people are really worried about whether they want to tell us or not. Do you have any of those plans? Which one of those are the most accurate for you? Those questions get you to go deeper on what they care about, where the skeletons are, where the bodies are buried. And it gives you a better position to then go back to the account and say, hey, when we do this implementation, this is why it needs to be a certain dollar amount. These are also new features we might be able to sell into the account because we're learning more about them in a way that I can't do, and I'm just trying to sell one half of the equation, the software part. Right? So you're right, there's balance, but done well, it's a multiplier for your business.
Absolutely. I've heard it called consultative selling, where just bringing the SME into the sales cycle, I think it's natural for a sales rep to be a little hesitant because, we're not professional sellers. We're not always the most polished. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I'm not a super polished guy all the time. Sometimes I'm a little too honest. But, I think that the pros just far outweigh the cons when it comes to customers just really valuing, hey, can you have someone in this sales cycle that actually they've been through it and they've seen it. They've been through the gauntlet and they can just tell it to me straight. I think there's huge, huge value to that. I don't even have to sell per se, right? When I get with a potential client and I'm just asking them questions, and then pretty soon we're talking about, oh, okay, we're talking all about their pain and the skeletons in the closet. Pretty soon it just becomes apparent to them like, oh, okay, yeah, you're asking a lot of really, really good questions. You're making me think about things that I hadn't thought of before. The software seems great. And boy, now I also know that I want to partner with you because I feel confident that your team, you're going to keep me out of trouble when I implement the software and post implementation. So yeah, I think huge, huge value in the sales cycle to bringing in an SME.
You've seen success in taking that approach. I've seen success in taking that approach because ultimately, when you are going deep into an account, you understand what the implementation is going to take. And look, nobody is saying you need to go do the same level of discovery you would when you're actually doing an implementation, but enough to know where a couple of landmines are. So when your competitor comes back to you and tries to undercut your price or undercut the services bid, you can explain, oh, no, here's where they might be underbidding you now, but they'll come back and ask for more money. Don't you worry. That's part of the game. Michael, thank you so much for sharing this story. I think that a lot of people are going to resonate with that, especially people who are trying to sell services and software at the same time. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some predictions for the future. Stay with us. Welcome back to Revving Up with RevEng. I am your host, Matt Haller, and it's time for some predictions. So, Michael, question for you. Where do you see the B2B technology world going in the next 12 to 18 months? What are some of the trends that you think are going to dominate the headlines?
I mean, I hate to throw out AI, but AI, right? It's such a tired topic at this point, but AI. So when it comes to the software itself, when it comes to the implementation of the software, I'm in the thick of it. I'm in the thick of this whole space. And I think that if we cannot keep up with the pace of AI, we're going to go the way of the dodo. And so I think we need to celebrate the power of it and the opportunities that it affords and learn how to harness it and get it to work for us.
It sounds like you're saying it's a paradigm shift, right? Like everything is changing about it, but we talked about a couple of things. We talked about software, we talked about sales, we talked about services. In your world, how are you seeing AI have the biggest impact? What are some of the two or three biggest impacts that you're seeing it potentially have already?
This is an interesting topic for me because we could consider the professional services folks out there to be the Paul Bunyans. That could be a perspective. You guys are Paul Bunyan, okay? Get out of the way. Accept that you guys had your day, all right? Now make way for the software. When it comes to that story, I find myself really thinking, okay, I don't need AI. We don't need it. We know this software like the back of our hands. We don't need AI helping us out. I've also seen what AI can do firsthand. Yesterday, this example may seem a little trite, but building a simple formula. For example, we were working with one of our clients, implementing Captivate and it was a big, nasty nested if formula. I'm sure you've seen your share of big, nasty nested ifs, and sometimes they can be really hard to decipher what's going on in that if formula.
I like the ones that look like those are my favorite.
This was one of those. And I was doing a little peacocking in front of the client. I was like, you know what? I'm going to be able to correct this if that is currently in there. So it wasn't a new implementation. So I was correcting a big nasty if, and I got it right. I corrected it. And another colleague of mine, another Cordionite, was on the call and was watching, and he didn't stop me. He let me do my thing, and I was feeling really good about myself. I'm like, yeah, I got that if, and I corrected it. And then after the call, he pulled me aside. He's like, hey, Michael, check this out. I'm going to take this if, what you built. He took it, he copied it, and he put it into ChatGPT. And I got some catching up to do on the power of ChatGPT. He said, all right, take this formula and make it more reader friendly. And it did all the proper indenting to where the top if is here, the second if is here, the third if is here, the fourth is, and then it does that kind of formatting. And it was just beautiful. I was like, oh my gosh. If it had been in that format from the start, I would have been able to decipher so much more quickly what was going on in that stupid formula.
And this is why software developers are taught how to use indents when they code, but that's why they teach that in software development. And for Excel, it is just the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Good luck understanding what's happening in that model.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And so it's small things like that where I'm seeing, okay, I'm a dinosaur in this space, but this is how someone like me could get left behind by someone who is more embracing of the advantage of some of this technology that is able to just very, very quickly take what us dinosaurs are able to do and just make it better. And so now, could I speak to ChatGPT or some AI tool at this point and say, hey, this is the logic that I need to code using Captivate IQ's proprietary formulas and whatnot? No, it's not there yet. But can it take what we, the Paul Bunyans, are giving to it and enhance it and make it better? Yes, absolutely. So we can use it as a tool to add a tremendous amount of value to our customers and really just maximize the likelihood that they're going to be able to understand what we've done. So that's just one example of, I feel like the reluctant adopters of these new tools, of this new technology, I feel like they're going to fall by the wayside if they can't learn to embrace the power of some of this new technology.
They're going to go by the way of Littlefoot's mother. And there I go. I just traumatized everybody who grew up in the 90s, watched The Land Before Time, and is listening to this podcast right now.
It's such a good movie, The Tree Star.
It's just, I know, but it truly devastated me. But it feels like you said, we're at a paradigm shift. And there's the phrase that gets thrown around a lot that says, AI is not going to take your job. Someone using AI is going to take your job. And we are in the era of efficiency. We're in the era of doing more with less. But right now, the opportunities with AI are so incredible and so numerous that I don't even think we know the pure applications of AI so far. Right now, we've seen some generative capabilities of creating some code, creating some text, but there's worlds where you're creating entire applications. There's so many opportunities and applications that we haven't even begun to think about, but we will in future episodes of Revving Up with RevEng. Michael, I want to thank you for swinging by. This has been an awesome episode and look forward to having you on again and learning more about the RevEng Cordion partnership.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt. Really, really enjoyed my time.
Thank you very much, and make sure you tune in next week for another episode with an all-new guest. Take care.